You know, I've often heard writers say that the best part of writing is the research, and I have to admit I got caught up in the research. I wouldn't say caught up, I was hooked. When I started to read about what happened in 1915, I was overwhelmed. And I was an adult. My mom would tell me these stories. I wouldn't, I could have cared less. I just didn't listen. But the depth of the research, I was traumatized. Let me tell you, it was really very, very difficult. I needed to understand the land of the Ottoman Empire, and I would go into used bookstores and I would go through the memoir section and I would go through the history section and I would open the book to the table of contents. And if I saw the word Constantinople, I bought that book. Those individuals were there in the early 1900s, and I needed to understand what was happening at that particular time. Books at UCLA in the book stacks under Turkey and World War I, they were just fabulous, fabulous books. And it was then I had learned about Henry Morgenthau, and I had read his 3 books that he had written about what had happened. And I discovered that his documents from 1913 to 1916 were housed at the Library of Congress. Well, actually the man had 30 reels, there were 30 reels of microfilm on Henry Morgenthau throughout his life. But I went through 10 of them from 1913 to 1916 to learn about what had actually happened there. And he was really my source. And he was such a great, great human being. But it was the depth of the cruelty that was so traumatizing. You know, I traveled to Turkey 3 times and to Syria twice for my research. I actually traveled the route from my mother's village in Hajjan all the way down to Deir Zor. And that was probably the most difficult part. And especially getting down to Deir Zor and seeing the Euphrates River. And my first thought is, why would you send people there when you wanted to exterminate them? Because water is a sustainer of life. And I'm going to encourage everyone to to see the documentary, because I discovered why they sent them there. And it was an easy way to get rid of the Armenians from just the Euphrates River. But how that happened, I think history needs to understand the depth of that tragedy. So, but I want to talk about Henry Morgenthau because he was such a great soul. And somewhere in my past, I had read something about him who was criticizing him and calling him an opportunist. And I thought, you know, Henry Morgenthau, I had to learn about him. I needed to understand the strength of this man, because what he said about what happened in Turkey in 1915 is extraordinarily important for history to know. And I did an in-depth research on him, and I realized that this man became the great human being he became because he started at age 14. And if there are any students watching this, you know, these teenage years are very, very formidable. And it's what one human being did at 14. He developed a chart on developing qualities he wanted to incorporate into his life and vices he wanted to avoid. Okay, next slide. Doug? Yeah. Okay, all right. All right, let me go to the second paragraph. Much like an athlete who practices hours to perfect his skills, Morgenthau loved the focusing and demanding his will and victory over these vices. That's how he built his moral muscles as a young man and shaped his impeccable character. Okay, next. He built within himself a strength of an honest power that led him to the world's recognition as a wealthy entrepreneur, a diplomat extraordinaire, and a noble humanitarian. Character became his magnet for opportunity. And in this state, well, first of all, I'm going to stop here for a moment and give you a little background of his time. When he was doing all of this at age 14, there was not even radio, there was not television, there were no smartphones. And in those days, the entertainment was really books. And so his time was different, but it doesn't make any difference about whether his time, this chart that he developed would be opportune for any student, because these teenage years, I can remember when I was 14 and I was having a huge problem with weight. And I said to myself, age 24 is much more important than 14. And these teenage years are so important for you. And I want to take you through how he became the man he became. Now, this chart was his, and my hope is that maybe you will learn from this chart and make a chart of your own to develop your own characters. Next slide, please. Okay, he titled the chart, Tabulating Virtues to be Acquired and Vices to be Avoided. Well, I would say, why don't you just say, tabulate qualities you want to incorporate into your life and those not so good qualities you'd rather not be likened to. Okay, next slide. Okay, his first, do not use any profane words. Now take that into today's society where the F word is so common. And you need to be aware that words define who you are. And would a gentleman, a polished gentleman, use an F word? And what kind of a human being uses that word? I want you to think about that and incorporate that thought into your own life. Now, as we go through these, realize these were all what Henry Morgenthau did for himself. His second, do not eat much sweet food as it darkens the mind. That was his thought. But it's the third one, always speak the truth. You know, if you lie, you have to find another lie to cover up the lies. But if you speak the truth, you never have to lie because you always know what the truth was, okay, or is. Okay, next slide, please. Spend nothing unnecessarily, for if you save when young, you can spend when old. Now, what 14-year-old kid thinks like that? And when I read that, I thought to myself, Henry Morgenthau, even when he was young, had an understanding of the long term. He understood that what you do today will affect who you are tomorrow. Number 5, never be idle, as it will cause you to think of wrong things. And that follows the next one. Number 6, talk little but think much. Observe people who like to talk. People who like to talk like to be the center of attention. Next slide, please. Study daily or else your knowledge will not improve. That's obvious. Number 8, keep your own secrets, for if you do not keep them, no one will keep them for you. Number 9, make few promises, but if you make any, fulfill them. Doesn't matter whether you are in the early 1900s or in 2021. If you make a promise, fulfill it. Next slide, please. Never speak evil of anyone. That includes the media, social media. 11, this is a big one, work for your employer as though it was for yourself. Now, all right, I'm gonna tell you something, right? I'm gonna stop it right here because, as I said, he started this when he was 14. Now, when he was 16, he was working for a lawyer as a clerk. And one of the clients was so impressed with Henry Morgenthau at 16, he gave him a share of stock in a company that he had a lot of stock in. Well, when Henry Morgenthau was 20 years of age, that company was having all the stockholders, there were about 70 stockholders, and they were having a problem with the president. They could not agree what to do and how to present their issues. And they decided to give their votes, all of their votes, to one person. Do you know who they gave that vote to? 20-year-old Henry Morgenthau, because he was the only one they all trusted. He did that throughout his teenage years. Number 12, deal fairly and honestly with your fellow clerks, but be not too intimate. Next slide, please. Be not inquisitive. In other words, don't be nosy. 14, neither borrow nor lend if avoidable. 5, trust none too much, but be not distrustful. Next. This is huge. Be not vain, for vanity is the destruction of men. Number 17, be grateful for the smallest favor. 18, never leave for tomorrow what can be done today. Next slide. Drink no kind of intoxicating liquor, nor smoke any weed. I'm sure it's not the weed that we think of today. Number 20, never play at any game of chance. 21, conquer temptation, though it be ever so powerful. Next slide. Keep yourself clean, as cleanliness is next to godliness. That was back in the late 1800s. Number 23, wonder not at the construction of man, but use your time in improving yourself. This is the big one, this last one. In deciding the doubts in the meaning of the above maxims, let conscience be your guide. And I want you to take a look at the word conscience. It's with science. Let conscience be your guide. Okay, now I have to admit, I was really taken with this because most teenagers are so consumed with themselves being liked that they don't realize the importance of these years to develop who you are and how you grow. You become that person, what you think. What you think is who you are. And so my hope is that you will take this chart, think of who you want to be, and bring those kinds of thoughts into your being. So I'm going to leave it with that because that was my intention for my talk today. I really want to see these teenagers grow into terrific human beings. And I can recall when I was 16, one of my teachers said, "You will never be any brighter than you are when you're 16." And at that time, I knew I was pretty quick, but I also knew I was not steady. And so I guess what I'm asking the students is to really think about, how do you become a steady human being? And developing some kind of a chart similar to this that you know is part of you, you want to be part of you. I just want to see all of you grow into the likes of Henry Morgenthau, who does humanitarian things and how he helped the Armenians. This man, well, first of all, you probably are unaware that the American missionaries were all over the Ottoman Empire. They had 1,000 schools, primary schools. They had 46 high schools, 6 colleges, 6 seminaries, 13 hospitals, and 1 university. So Americans were all over the Ottoman Empire, and Henry Morgenthau was very close to these missionaries. So when he came back to America in 1916, he was very helpful in initiating the Near East relief. And because of him and all those wonderful people, those wonderful missionaries who went back to the Ottoman Empire at the end of the war to rescue as many of the orphans and survivors as they could, a lot of that credit goes to Henry Morgenthau. And in 1922, when Smyrna was burning, all the Greeks and Armenians, there were 1 million of them that ended up in Greece. And at the time, Greece had a population of 5 million. And can you imagine a country with 5 million people taking in 1 million refugees? And that's what they did. And Henry Morgenthau was very much involved with that movement. He was very much involved for finding funding for that to happen. And there was even a statue of him in Athens. And he did this all when he started at age 14. So I'm just throwing that out to you all. And hopefully you'll find something in his 24 maxims that might be good for you as well. So thank you all very much. And I'm really pleased to have been here today. And it looks like my Zoom let me stay the whole time. And I'm delighted.